Hello people, welcome to the new episode. Today we are going to set up DevScript using concurrently library. We are going to create context for Apollo server. That means we will be able to share data throughout the resolvers. It could be authorization tokens. It can be some sort of data that is used throughout the resolvers. We are going to also implement two mutations, I believe, one register and one login. We're going to generate types for them, and we are going to implement in the end Next.js. We are going to write some code with it for establishing the database connection. We can start by installing concurrently as a development dependency, and we also want to install mod1 for our development server. I'm going to set up a script which is called dev, and here we are going to write concurrently. -k option means that if the process already exists, it's going to kill the process basically. And the first process is going to be TypeScript watch command, and the second one will be nodemon dist index.js. So this concurrently will execute two commands and will run them in it is going to run them both in two separate processes, so that we can watch the changes with TypeScript and rerun our server whenever this index.js changes. All right, let's run the command and see if it works. And as you can see, the TypeScript was generated. All right, let's see if it works, and let's run it. As you can see, it works. And whenever we change, I accidentally closed the terminal. Let me rerun this, and index.js, if I basically change something here and save, it is gonna rerun, and as you can see, hello got printed out, so it works fine. Let's create context. Context is defined in the start standalone server options. It takes let me see, it is complaining because it is expecting to return an empty object. All right, and now we want to also generate a secret for our JWT token, because this verify function takes a token and also the secret that we basically used for token generation. And this secret needs to be generated, and I'm gonna generate this with this library called crypto in Node.js. You can basically generate it however you want. But I'm going to use crypto for that. Random bytes is the function that I use. Let's say 84 bytes, and we are going to format this to hex. And this is the secret that we use. Let's also touch end file and store our secret here, because we don't want it to be visible on GitHub. Let me also attach git ignore and also initialize the repository. And we are going to say node git ignore main. Let's copy, paste everything. And this has also, it is ignoring environment.env file, .env development local, and also other environment files that you might use. So this is working now. What we can do is we can also touch in source folder a config folder. Let's make a directory which is called config, and inside of it we are going to create index file, and there we are basically going to source index. Okay, it somehow didn't work. Let me create this way index. What we want to do is we want to export default JWT, and here we have a secret process and JWT secret. Of course, we need this .env library. .env to load the environment variables from .env file, and we need to import config from .env, and this needs to be executed in order to load our environment variables from .env file, and then this is going to be basically attached. This variable is going to be attached on the env object on the process. So now it should actually work fine. Let me import our config that we just wrote, and also pass secret here. Now it's complaining because this might be undefined, since this is either string or undefined. What we can say is, if it's undefined, then basically attach empty string to it, which works. We can wait for this verification here, and if it fails, we can say verifying JWT token failed. This we can log out. Payload is here, and then we basically have in this payload we're going to have like user information such as ID, which is an UID. We will have an email, and so on. First of all, what I want to do is I want to type this payload. So let me define interface custom JWT payload, and this actually extends the JWT payload that comes from JWT JSON Web Token library, and this has a key. Like this basically means that you can attach any key which is type string, and it has this default properties also, such as issue date, sub is the ID, I believe, and issued at, for example, and other useful properties. So let me extend this here and say we have also email, and let me import, let me say this verify as JWT. And now if we basically see the type is, it has email, sub, and other properties as well. So that's cool. Let me quickly refactor this and say JWT verified token. I'll take the try catch block and implement here, return payload. We have token as an argument, and then we can say if token exists, then we can basically payload or JWT payload. JWT payload equals to equals to the return type of JWT verified token that we created, and this takes as a first argument the token. Now what we want to do is we want to check if a user with the sub exists in our database. So this, whenever we get the payload, we want to see if the sub here of the user basically exists, if the user data exists in database. Otherwise he's not in the database, and he won't be able to query stuff or access private mutations or queries. For that we want to implement or install first connects, and we will establish a database connection with connects. We have connects. From connects, then we can create connects instance, and this takes client, which is Postgres. We're gonna be using Postgres. So it takes version. This is currently 7.2 for connects, and connection object, which has port is the default one, 5432. It takes also DB name, and in this case let's use Facebook dev, which will be the development database name. Production will be prod or maybe Facebook. So we also need, sorry, it's not DB but database. We need a host, we need password, user, host will be localhost, or sometimes it also throws an error because it needs to have the IP address. Password will be Postgres, and the user will also be Postgres for development server. Well, let's actually abstract those, put those in the environment file, and for that let me create .env development, and this is not in git ignore, I believe. Let me quickly remove from the cache so that it can be recognized by, okay, now it's recognized by git as a ignore file. Let me create this and create JWT, pass everything here, because we are going to have in the future .env production and development file. Again, same game here, git production, right, and here we are going to have in our end file, that's basically the base file, we are going to have node env, which can be either dev or prod, and we are going to be asking here, we're going to be asking const is dev process env. So basically, if process env not env equals to dev, then you can config path take the development, and otherwise, or you can say if it's prod, take production, and if it's dev, then you can take development. And then we have a next, or even like db, we have a host, which is, all right, I quickly basically wrote the connection object here, and with the from the config, and this config file is basically takes the environment variables from the either if it's a production environment from the env.production, or if it's a development environment, then from .env development. And what we want to do now is to basically check if the sub exists in database, we say, right? So we say connects instance, then we can say basically in the user space table, so we're going to have user schema and the base table inside of it, and we're going to say this on the base table, user base table, we are going to select everything, and where the ID is equal to JWT sub, and obviously this needs to, we need to say, okay, JWT, if this exists, then user, boom. And then if the user exists, JWT payload. If user exists, that means we can pass the JWT payload, otherwise it is going to be null, and we have to obviously type our context and say JWT payload is our custom JWT payload of type of custom JWT payload. And now it says something is wrong, or exactly, or either it's JWT payload, custom JWT payload, or null. So we need to also say here either it's this or it's null. It is still complaining because it can be undefined as well. Okay, it can be undefined as well, that's why. It can be undefined because if user exists, if JWT payload exists, then user exists as well. And if user exists, then JWT payload exists as well. So we can enforce with exclamation mark that this can't be undefined. So it works, nice. Let me now basically remove the previous defined schemas, the book and user, and let me generate, let me see, it complains because we just deleted the generated files. let me create a directory which is called auth, and in this directory we are going to have GraphQL file which is called schema, and in here we are going to extend mutation. We're gonna have auth, oh I forgot to type, we will have auth email string, it's a required property, also required property, and it is going to return auth mutations. And this auth mutations contain two mutations, which is login. It returns a token, and register mutation also returns a token. So that's important. And now here we need to basically remove query because we don't have any queries, otherwise the library throws an error. And if we now generate, I think it's called generate the script. If you call generate, we are generating new resolvers. Let's add the generate files also in staging. And now we can basically go to resolvers, mutation, format this code, and here we want to have register some token and login also some token. And in auth, in the auth mutation, which is the parent top level mutation for our auth mutations, we are going to implement logic as well. This basically returns login and register. And instead of login and register, we don't want to handle login mutation and register mutation in here, because we only want to pass the arguments from this resolver. And this is where the mappers come into play. This watch pattern that I commented out in the last video, this mapper basically is responsible for changing the return type for mutations in general. And now what we want to do is we want to define a mapper inside of the auth file. And let's say we have a TypeScript file which is called auth mappers ts, and in this file we can define, I have to look up how they exactly implement it. Alright, so my bad. This the file name needs to be schema mappers, not auth mappers. My mistake. And in here we are basically writing blah 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 something and mapper. And this something mapper needs to be the same. It needs to be have the same name as the return type here. So if we say schema mappers export interface schema auth mutations mapper, and then we're going to say basically, or is it a type? No, it's an interface. We're going to say it is going to return email and a password, right? Because we want to pass from this mutation in the child mutations these arguments basically. So what I want to do now is regenerate the types, and then if I go here and now basically make auto-completion or a suggestion, you can see that password and email are required here as the types. So we did the job, and if I see the arguments, or if I basically destruct it and then check what's inside, you can see it's a password, and we can say password and email, and those arguments will be passed to the child resolvers, which are basically this here. And if you can, if I write parent here and then see what's in there, you can see it's password and email. So, and here we can work with the basically registering user, and here we can say register user, and here we say login user. It returns a string. So this is basically what mappers are for. And yep. What I also forgot is awaiting the database query, and also in the end we need to write first, and this function is responsible for grabbing the first row that is found in the database and returning it, because otherwise it is going to return a list of users, but we only wanted to return the first row that it finds. And by the way we are protecting our private mutations or auth mutations is basically this way. I can demonstrate you if we have, for example, a user query. Let me write schema, and if we, for example, have extend type query, and in here we have a user query, and in here, boom, user, we have an ID, for example, UID, and let's say email. Why is it complaining right now? It is complaining because we need to add in the base schema, we need to add type query as well, so that it can extend from it. So now type, we don't have UID, but I can add UID in our base schema as a scalar. And now it should be fine. And if I generate resolver, and then implement it, we don't need to implement the ID. So if we go to user resolver, and then inside of it we have a user query, it obviously returns user object with the email and ID, and here we can basically say context. Okay, I think this tool does not by default type the context, although we can do it, we can configure it here, I guess, with the config, and then I need to look up how it's done exactly. Okay, the way we are mapping context automatically is we're going to tell where the context is stored, our interface. This will be stored in types context.ts context. And if I create a TypeScript file, first I need to create types folder directory, and then here context, and then we can basically take these two, paste it here, export context, can export context. We can, we need to, that's JWT token, so let me also create another for JWT types. I'm going to take this in here and export also JWT token custom. And here, let me see, like this, very cool. In our user resolver, if I delete this and then PM generate again, and if I go to query user, it still does not work. I think because this needs to be removed. We can try again. Alright, this does not work. Yeah, I'm gonna find out how it exactly works. But for now, let's do this manually here. So we are giving it a context type, and what we can say here is this, and then what we can do is you can say context JWT. If this exists, if this does not exist, then throw new GraphQL error unauthorized extension, and in extension we have a code which is unauthenticated or unauthorized, and status is 404, but it's 401. Sorry, 401. 401 is actually authenticated and not unauthorized. That was actually correct. Not authenticated. So that's the error. Now if we want to access this query, basically user query, we want to go through the context and then basically check if the token is valid and not, and this is how it should work. Now, since we don't have database, we can't really test it. So for the next tutorial, I'm going to set up database, and yeah, and after that we are going to test if our server works as expected. Thank you very much for watching, and if you have any comments, suggestions, please let me know what I can improve, and have a nice day.